money, power, social influence. One man held all three, and at times, the entire American economy balanced on the edge of a knife, waiting for his decision. Presidents feared him. Industrial titans trembled before him. Entire industries bent to his will like iron rods under heat. When the United States stood on the brink of financial collapse, its gold reserves nearly gone, its credibility in ruins, the government did something it could barely admit out loud. It quietly turned to the same man it had publicly condemned, and with a single signature, he could save the system. Or let it burn. This is the story of John Pierpont Morgan, the most feared banker of the Gilded Age. The man who built the world's first billion-dollar corporation, turned Wall Street into the command center of global finance, and twice pulled America back from the abyss. April 17th, 1837, Hartford, Connecticut. A baby was born into privilege. His name, John Pierpont Morgan. His mother, Juliet, was cultured, disciplined, and deeply religious. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was a towering figure in international banking, a man who believed finance was a battlefield and that weakness had no place on it. But the boy's childhood wasn't filled with strength. It was filled with suffering. Morgan endured brutal coughing fits, searing migraines, seizures, and waves of illness, scarlet fever among them. While other children raced through fields, he sat indoors, pale and restless, surrounded by ledgers and financial statements. Then came the blow that nearly broke him entirely. Rheumatic fever struck. It left him nearly incapacitated, unable to walk, unable to function. Junius Morgan, ice-blooded and unsentimental, made a decision that would have crushed most boys. He sent his teenage son away. Alone, to the remote Azores Islands, adrift in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where the salt air might heal him. Morgan spent nearly a year there in isolation. No peers, no father, no comfort, only books, ledgers, and the sound of waves. If the body is weak, the mind must become stronger. That became his education, and a lesson he would never forget. Numbers never got sick. Numbers never lied. By 1857, Morgan had studied in Boston, Switzerland, and Germany. At just 19, he entered the financial world, his father securing him a position on Wall Street, analyzing the American economy for a powerful London banking house. His job, observe. Report, stay in line. But Morgan had fire in his blood that no amount of European schooling could extinguish. In 1859, while visiting New Orleans, he spotted an opportunity no one else would dare touch. A shipment of Brazilian coffee had arrived, with no buyer, no plan, and no future. Morgan moved instantly. Using company funds, without authorization, he purchased the entire cargo. The risk was staggering. The older bankers were furious, his father especially. But Morgan had already sold it. Quickly, profitably, brilliantly. Junius called it recklessness. History would call it instinct. 2 years later, at 24, Morgan stepped out of his father's shadow and founded his own company. That same year, he married Amelia Sturgis, the woman he loved with a depth that surprised even those who knew him. For a brief, glorious moment, life felt complete. Then a persistent cough that doctors named tuberculosis slowly stole everything. Morgan took Amelia on a long Mediterranean honeymoon, chasing warmer air, clinging to hope. The warmth didn't save her. 4 months after their wedding, she was gone. Morgan was 24 years old, already a widower. The grief threatened to swallow him whole. Instead, he buried himself in work, deeper than ever before. While Morgan fought private battles, America erupted into civil war. The Conscription Act required men of his class to serve. Morgan paid $300 for a substitute. He had other plans. Instead of fighting the war, he would finance it. One deal became notorious. Morgan helped fund the purchase of 5,000 surplus Hall carbines from the government at $3.50 each. Minor modifications were made. Then, the same rifles were sold back to the government for $22 each. A profit exceeding 600%. Critics called it war profiteering, Morgan called it business. But the true turning point came in 1871. Morgan partnered with banker Anthony Drexel, forming Drexel, Morgan and Company, the firm that would one day become J.P. Morgan and Company. At first, Morgan simply connected investors with entrepreneurs. He was the bridge between old European money and the raw, hungry American economy. But as his fortune compounded, he began asking a different question. Why arrange deals when you can control them? That thought, cold, precise, and ruthless, changed American capitalism forever. Morgan looked at the American railroad industry and didn't see progress. He saw chaos. Dozens of competing rail companies were waging brutal price wars, slashing fares, undercutting each other, hemorrhaging capital. Investors fled the sector entirely. The whole industry was a powder keg waiting to explode. Morgan saw something else entirely: opportunity. His solution was elegant in its brutality: consolidation. Instead of letting railroads bleed each other dry, he would merge them into larger, stronger, more profitable organizations. When struggling railroads came to him desperate for help, Morgan had one condition: full control. If we cannot compete, we combine. He bought the failing lines, restructured their management, slashed waste, then merged them into massive networks that dominated entire regions of the country. The strategy became known as Morganization, and it was as much surgery as it was finance. Morgan didn't just invest in companies, he ran them. He replaced executives, restructured boards, rewrote strategy from the top down. And European capital flooded in, because where Morgan's name appeared, stability followed. He purchased 250,000 shares of the powerful New York Central Railroad from William Vanderbilt. He underwrote $40 million in bonds to finance the Northern Pacific Railroad, the largest railroad bond transaction in American history at the time. By the end of the century, Morgan controlled roughly 1/3 of all railroads in the United States. The rail system was the backbone of the American economy, and Morgan now controlled its spine. But railroads were only the beginning. In 1901, Morgan executed the most audacious corporate maneuver the world had ever witnessed. Industrial titan Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King of America, wanted to retire. He wanted to sell. Morgan asked him one question: name your price. Carnegie wrote a number on a piece of paper: $480 million. Morgan agreed. Immediately, without flinching. Later, in a moment of almost shocking candor, Morgan admitted the truth: I would have paid $100 million more. Morgan merged Carnegie Steel with several other companies to create U.S. Steel, a corporation worth $1.4 billion, the first billion-dollar company in the history of the world. It controlled roughly 2/3 of American steel production. Railroads and steel, the twin pillars of the industrial economy, were now under Morgan's influence. But he wasn't finished. He helped finance Thomas Edison's electrical experiments. He orchestrated the merger that created General Electric. He played a critical role in building what eventually became AT&T, his specialty taking fragmented, feuding industries and fusing them into unstoppable giants. And with each consolidation, his grip on the American economy tightened. Power of that magnitude creates enemies. By the late 19th century, many Americans were convinced that a handful of financiers secretly controlled the country. Morgan was the face of that fear. But even his fiercest critics had to acknowledge one inconvenient truth. When genuine crisis struck, Morgan delivered. In 1893, the United States plunged into a devastating economic depression. Businesses collapsed, banks failed, unemployment soared. Foreign investors raced to convert American bonds into gold, draining the Treasury's reserves with terrifying speed. By 1895, the U.S. Treasury held barely $9 million in gold. The minimum needed to support the dollar was $100 million. The country was days away from defaulting on its debts. President Grover Cleveland was desperate. He had almost no options. Morgan traveled to Washington with a radical proposal. A private syndicate of powerful bankers and foreign investors would replenish the government's gold reserves. $65 million in bonds backed by millions of ounces of gold. No bureaucracy, no delay, just Morgan's word as collateral. Cleveland agreed. The deal was signed. Morgan wired New York. In 22 minutes, the entire bond issue was sold. Confidence returned. Panic stopped. The bleeding ended. Morgan had effectively rescued the United States government from financial collapse. But the rescue created a new and unsettling fear: If one private banker could save the country on a whim, what was to stop him from destroying it? Morgan's power reached its absolute zenith during the Panic of 1907. Banks began failing. Crowds packed the sidewalks outside financial institutions demanding their money back. A complete banking collapse felt not just possible, it felt imminent. President Theodore Roosevelt, who had built his career attacking Morgan and the robber barons, quietly sent word they needed him. Morgan gathered the most powerful bankers in America inside his private library in New York. The doors closed. Then, Morgan did something remarkable. He locked them. Gentlemen, the country needs a solution tonight. For hours, the most powerful men in American finance argued, negotiated, and fought. Morgan presided over it all, 70 years old, running a fever, coughing with every breath, and he refused to let a single one of them leave until they had a plan. By morning, they did. Massive capital injections would flow into failing banks. The U.S. Treasury added $25 million in emergency support. The panic subsided. The banking system survived. Morgan was 70 years old, sick, exhausted, and barely standing, and he had just saved the American financial system for the second time. But the era of unchecked financial power was ending. Investigators launched the Pujo Committee hearings, determined to expose what they called the money trust, the hidden web of banking influence that had quietly colonized corporate America. Morgan was summoned to testify. In the hearing room, he became the living symbol of everything reformers feared. Reporters described his towering frame, his piercing, unblinking stare, and the severe rosacea that had permanently marked his face. Morgan despised being photographed. Portrait artists were routinely ordered to repaint it. But in the harsh light of the hearing room, there was no escaping it. The hearings revealed the full, staggering scope of Morgan's influence, an interconnected web stretching across nearly every major industry in America. The nation was shocked. The investigation ultimately led to the creation of the Federal Reserve System, a central bank designed to ensure that no future crisis would ever again require the intervention of a single private financier. Morgan had, in his very dominance, made himself obsolete. Behind the power and the legend, Morgan's body was failing. Years of stress had carved deep damage. He suffered multiple nervous breakdowns. The weight of public condemnation wore on him in ways he would never admit. In a strange twist of fate, Morgan had originally booked passage aboard the Arm's Titanic for its maiden voyage in April 1912. At the last moment, illness forced him to cancel. He never boarded. As the 20th century pressed forward, newspapers increasingly painted Morgan as the embodiment of corporate greed. Progressive reforms were slowly dismantling the world he had built. The age of the robber barons was fading, and so was Morgan himself. March 31st, 1913. Rome, Italy. John Pierpont Morgan died at 75, far from Wall Street, far from the boardrooms and private libraries where he had changed the world. Leadership of his empire passed to his son. Decades of mergers and expansions transformed the firm into one of the largest financial institutions on Earth. Nearly 2 centuries after his birth, the bank bearing his name still dominates global finance, one of the most powerful financial organizations in human history. Morgan had shaped railroads, steel, electricity, banking. He had rescued governments, outmaneuvered rivals, and reorganized entire industries with the cold precision of a surgeon. Some called him a savior, others called him a monopolist. But whether you admired him or despised him, one fact remains undeniable. When America faced its darkest financial moments, when the Treasury ran dry and panic spread through the streets, one name echoed through the halls of power: J.P. Morgan.